Good morning and welcome. I appreciate you tuning into this live presentation today about innovating in a time of crisis. Noting that it's National Reconciliation Week, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that this webinar is being hosted on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respect to the elders, both past, present and future. Today, you'll be hearing from 5 panelists and also myself, including a keynote presentation from Data61 CSIRO team leader, Dr. Stefan Hajkovic. Joseph Dodd will provide an overview about innovation connections. Megan Sedman will present on Kickstart, and I'll present on APR.Intern. They're all government incentivized programs to help start your innovation journey. You'll also hear directly from 2 small to medium enterprises, OMX Solutions and Telix Pharmaceuticals, who will be represented by Mick Shaddock and Dr. Mike Wheatcroft about their experiences within these programs. Dr. Stefan Hajkovic is a principal scientist at CSIRO working in the field of strategic foresight and a director of the Data61 Insights team. He spends his time thinking about the future and about practical ways to help people make wiser choices. I'll now hand over to Stefan to get started.
Thanks very much, and I'll just share my presentation now. So hopefully that's working and everyone can see it. My name is Stefan Hajkovic. I'm Principal Scientist in Strategic Foresight at CSIRO's Data61. We do a lot of sort of medium to longer term strategic planning and foresight projects, although in the current COVID environment, everything is being condensed a lot. 2 of our recent projects were on artificial intelligence ethics and the national roadmap on artificial intelligence. What I want to talk to you today is about the changes we're seeing in COVID-19, the near-term trends and futures that are likely, with an emphasis on digital technology and how that's changing the landscape, and then wind up with a bit of thoughts around the role of innovation, science, research and technology in digging ourselves out of the hole. So part 1 is really some things that are happening to the economy. Pretty much every statistic and every graph I show you in this section should be started with the word unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this happen before. So the OECD estimates that every month of containment is knocking 2% off global annual GDP growth, which is just a massive hit to the world economy. In Australia, Treasury is forecasting GDP to fall by over 10% in the June quarter, which would represent our biggest fall ever in history. So it's playing out domestically as well. Global trade has been massively impacted. There's a lot of empty container ships at the moment around the world, and it's 60% cheaper to drive a boat through the Suez Canal because of the lack of demand. But our first quarter of calendar year 2020 saw a drop of 3%, but now the forecast is for a 27% drop in global trade, with commodity prices coming down by 20%, which is an enormous decrease in trade activity. Unemployment has skyrocketed from where it was. So that's employed people there on the left, which we can just see plummeting, and the unemployment rate taking a massive jump very quickly in April there. With hospitality, catering sectors of the economy most heavily impacted. But that has the potential to go much more broadly than people who lost their jobs just due to the restrictions. That can happen much more broadly across the economy to other types of jobs. The most pronounced shock in unemployment has been in the United States, with its April unemployment data getting to the highest ever at 14.7% there. And also the number of United States citizens who are filing for unemployment benefits that graph is very telling. We can see it's moved and taken some jumps, but nowhere near over the past 50 years what it has done in the last month. In addition to this, the world's advanced economies are entering this crisis with record debt levels. This data comes from the IMF. We can see that the gross public debt as a percentage of GDP, weighted average for advanced economies, has been growing. But according to articles in Bloomberg Press, the world's central banks bought almost US $1.4 trillion of financial assets in March, which is 5 times the previous monthly record in April. So that doesn't, what the graph I'm showing you, that doesn't account for what will be a massive expansion of public sector debt as governments are trying to bail out the position they're in with the COVID economy shock. But at the same time, interest rates at record time lows. So this here is the weighted average for advanced economies worldwide by IMF. Mostly these are OECD economies like Australia's are in here. We can see interest rates went up in the 80s but have fallen consistently and are currently at all-time lows. That graph, if we took it out to 2019, would be lower again. So it means really that governments are constrained in terms of fiscal stimulus and monetary policy. Monetary policy is the use of interest rates to stimulate the economy, and fiscal stimulus is injecting money into the economy, but both are limited in what they can do. Air travel has also obviously been something with massive impacts. So we've seen a big drop in revenue passenger kilometres, RPKs, and this is a measure used in the aviation sector to really measure the amount of frequent flyer miles that the world is wrapping up. So a big drop in that, and then it increases, but it is increasing more slowly than global GDP, and by 2023 is catching up to the 2019 level, and this is off the backdrop of continued growth. What's also happening with air flights, data here again from the International Air Transport Association, IATA, is a fall of 8.5% in average trip length. So when people are getting on a plane, they're flying shorter distances. So the long-haul international routes have been hit. So, I mean, that's a bunch of headline statistics, which, you know, as an analyst, I haven't seen anything like that in my life. And it sets the scene for where we're at and where we need to go. Now I want to turn to the digital economy because things are happening differently there. The first thing to look at there is the stock market in Australia, the ASX. We can see the ASX 300 took a fall, but the ASX All Technology Index, which is digital companies like WiseTech, which does logistics software, Technology One, Appen, an AI company, Xero is in there as well. REA Group, which is realestate.com. So there's quite a few big-sized tech sector companies in Australia that mostly have a digital platform or digital software behind them. And for a while, since 2017, they've been growing faster than the rest of the marketplace. The light blue line there is the S&P ASX 300. We can see that we had this complete crash as they both fell. 23rd of March, thereabouts, was when it was at the bottom. But the S&P ASX All Technology Index is rebounding way faster and way higher. And it's showing evidence that the digital and tech sector is what's going to take us out of this dive. And that's because the effect of COVID has been to push a huge amount of demand onto digital and tech services. Like online shopping has just boomed in the current environment. So Coles and Woolworths, our two biggest supermarket chains, have seen this happen, and they're making big investments. Coles just recently signed a $400 million deal with Charter Hall for 2 high-tech industrial sheds in Sydney and Melbourne in response to a 24% jump in online sales. The fact they're doing this during a downturn when liquidity and cash is everything, they're tying up cash in investments, tends to suggest that they have a view that online is going to be a structural shift. It's not a temporary shift. This is going to be a long-term shift in how we shop. Woolworths, we can see a similar pattern of activity. They think a $3 billion Australian dollar growth next financial year in online sales from where they are, and they've recruited an additional 5,000 third-party couriers to complement the current fleet of 800 trucks. So the person who delivered my Woolworths groceries a couple of weeks ago to the front gate came in a seafood van. And he said his seafood business was done because all the restaurants were shut. No one was buying seafood. So he switched and he was driving a Woolies delivery truck for them. And he said his minimum number of deliveries he was doing was 20 per day, but usually much more than that. And when he reopens the seafood business, it's going to be a completely online business model. So he's in a process of digital transformation, which I think we can see happening with hundreds of thousands of small Australian businesses are currently in the process of rethinking themselves as digital. It's also jobs as well. So amidst the downturn, when job losses were spiralling, Woolworths announced 20,000 new jobs in late March to boost its capabilities. Atlassian is not on the ASX, it's on NASDAQ. It's a well-known Australian software company that did work communication software or work sharing software, a bit like Microsoft Teams, its Jira product. Well, it's reported revenue growth of 411 million US in the last quarter, which we didn't expect. 33% year-on-year sales growth amidst the biggest downturn in history. They're on a recruitment drive, adding another 200 staff to their workforce in March, and are making public announcements to the market about intent to invest, expand, and grow. So they see a business environment as being really favourable for growth. Let's go to online education, which is absolutely booming. So the United Nations estimates that 1.2 billion young people in 186 countries with partial or complete lockdowns were studying remotely, which is just an incredible shift of humanity's young people into a different form of learning, as many of them are going digital. Before the COVID-19 industry, analysts forecast that the online technologies market would grow from 18.7 billion to 350 billion by 2025. But that was before COVID. I'd say now we've seen this, it's going to get much bigger and much more significant. This is how a lot of people will be learning. Telehealth is booming as well. We can see what's a pretty well a line that is made flat by the recent expansion. But the number of requested Medicare items for telehealth services in Australia has gone up a lot. A lot of people may have seen a doctor in the past few months over a telehealth connection. I have. And it's going to be, I think, a longer term shift in terms of how healthcare is delivered. We're still learning with telehealth, but there are hopes that telehealth is what will allow us to meet the future healthcare bill, as most state and territory jurisdictions in Australia cannot afford the unsustainable growth in healthcare costs. But telehealth can really reduce the load on the system and make those cost savings. So it's likely that we are going to see a structural shift in terms of how we get healthcare, with a bigger shift into telehealth. Online retail is growing very robustly, and the April data is actually out now, so I don't have that yet. But you can see year-on-year growth there of online retail is a big jump in the March, and then month-on-month it grows pretty quickly too. I will note that dark blue 8.2% for traditional retail month-on-month growth for March is actually in the next data, it completely falls away, because that was around the panic buying when people were just going to the supermarkets and getting lots of mostly toilet paper, but that will probably fall off. So we have seen strong growth in online retail. The other big thing in the online retail data that we're watching is that it is switching from international through to domestic. So the biggest growth has been domestic online retailers, not international, which it used to be the other way around. So Australians are buying online, but they're buying locally. So they're limiting their eBay search, for example, to products sold in Australia. Teleworking. So I can't get a really good statistic, actually. There's a lot said on it, and we all know it's happening because we're all currently doing it right now. But before COVID-19, around 30% of all employed persons in Australia, or 3.5 million people, regularly work from home in their main job or business using telework. But I'd say the vast bulk of my organisation and almost everyone I know has switched to a mostly or complete telework option now. I think it is interesting. We can only speculate, but lots of people are saying they're not going back to business as usual. They're unlikely to return to the office. And there are significant productivity gains in how we work. And if in where I live in Brisbane, the average commute time to work now is something like 63 minutes door to door. So if that's shaved off morning and afternoon, that people are on average getting a 2-hour time slot back in their day. And the commute times are even worse in Sydney and Melbourne than Brisbane. Demand for digital workers remains strong. It's going to grow 100,000 by 2024, leading to a total workforce of 790,000. For the past 7 years, digital technology workforce has grown at 2.5% a year compared to the overall labour market at 1.7% per year. Fastest growth is in healthcare, increased by 50%, and the ITC sector itself is forecast to grow by 43,000 workers. So a lot of digital workers aren't in what we call the ICT sector. They're spread across all other parts of the economy, like health and mining and other industries. Salaries are good, consistently high salaries compared to other professions. Like if we took out software and applications programmers, starting salary of 104,000 compared to 73,112 in the overall labour market. recent data for Seek is showing some very strong salaries for more targeted positions. But if we get into things like data analytics, business professionals, or if we pick in bits of AI, $200,000 a year, but a lot of salaries well north of that when we get into highly specialized and the skills that industry require. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science, that combination is really under demand massively at the moment. LinkedIn has put out its 2020 Emerging Jobs Report for Australia. Of the 15 there, it starts at an AI specialist, cybersecurity specialist, marketing automation specialist, robotics engineer. Number 5 is the first non-digital one, and then number 6, but then we're back into data scientist, data engineer, and as we go down, anti-money laundering specialist is a digital technology specialist. They're data scientists. And at the end is automation consultant, which is less about the tech, but how the tech is applied, but still what I'd call a digital tech sector position. Exports are growing really well too. A headline statistic here is ICT service exports, just software and information products being sold through an internet connection to other countries out of Australia, increased 24.5% over the previous year. So exports in ICT products are booming. So that quick snapshot tells us that something different is going on in the digital technology sector. We've hit this massive block in the road, but it is not evenly applied. There are probably multiple parts of the economy that have got growth prospects, but I'm going to point towards the digital tech sector, and probably that first graph I showed of the ASX 300 versus the ASX all tech sector companies, which is mostly digital and software companies, that difference is just remarkable. And that gives us insight to where the growth story is going to be. There's some other amazing things we're learning about the world in the post-COVID, in the COVID-19 environment. One has got to be global greenhouse gas emissions. A Nature paper recently published last week finds 17% decrease worldwide by early April compared to 2019. So the world has been trying to get its emissions down year on year and failing consistently. Every year our emissions grow, and this is the first time ever we've seen a decrease. Their peak emissions in individual countries decreased by 26% during the COVID period. In Australia, they were down by 28%. Decreased traffic accidents is another one. According to the Australian government, there were 75 deaths on our road in April 2020, which is 25.3% lower than the average for April over the past 5 years. So that is actually pretty remarkable, again, given that Australian governments for decades have been trying to bring down the road death toll and not succeeding in doing it. It's mostly hovered at around a constant level. But this time, for the first time in decades, we've seen a major decrease. In California, a study by University of California, Davis revealed that traffic collisions and fatalities across the state dropped by 50% in the first 3 weeks of COVID-19 shutdown. Fatal and or injury crashes were down from 100 to 500 per day. Savings of 40 million a day, or 1 billion since the restrictions were introduced, and traffic volumes were 55% down on highways. So this also is a pretty remarkable achievement. And there's been a cycling boom. Widespread reports in the media of cycling shops being inundated with demand for bicycles and bicycle servicing. My mountain bike is currently in Taringa here in Brisbane under servicing, and I can't get it back for 7 days due to the huge queue up of people all putting their bikes on for a service. So some interesting things are going on in COVID-19. There's probably a lot more in terms of how we're living, physical activity and recreation. The trails on Mount Cootha are alive with people more than I've ever seen. There's probably a lot of interesting and good things going on as well. The last thing I want to reflect on is part 4, the role of science, research, technology and innovation in getting to where we're going. If we can't use interest rates or fiscal stimulus, so remember the 2 graphs I showed of interest rates and debt levels, we need to turn to productivity uplift. And we get productivity uplift from science, research, technology and innovation. Productivity is a really important measure for economists. It's how much goes into the sausage factory, how much comes out, the efficiency with which we convert inputs to outputs. And in the long term, this is what matters for economic growth and wealth creation. So we need productivity uplift, and we need STRI, science, technology, research, innovation, to get there. And we can learn from history. This here is a photo of the Spanish flu, which was devastating for humanity. 50 million people tragically lost their lives in Spanish flu. So that was a huge impact on the world. And it was followed by the forgotten depression of 1920 to 21, a worldwide depression, which isn't so often talked about, but was very real and is pretty similar to the situation we're in now, of mass unemployment. GDP fell, the Dow Jones crashed. There was a lot of upheaval in that time, but the Roaring 20s followed that period. So 1920, 21 saw the Depression, but 22 to 29 saw rates of GDP growth roughly more than double long-term averages. It led to it kind of came apart in the 1930s depression, which was around all the speculation on Wall Street, and that film, The Great Gatsby, there with Leonardo DiCaprio, was captured. That was at the very end of the Roaring 20s, when all the greed and speculation on Wall Street led to another crash. But that period in the 1920s is known as the Roaring 20s, and economists from Adelaide Uni and Columbia University in New York studied this. And they came to the conclusion that the main reason that growth happened so quickly was the widespread development and adoption of electricity, a general purpose technology capable of being applied across all industry sectors. That led to efficiencies, that led to productivity uplift, and a whole lot of innovation in business development that went with it as well. And that was what created this period of economic prosperity. So what's the general purpose tech of the 2020s? There's a few, but artificial intelligence, digital technology, and genetics are standouts. These are technologies that are applied everywhere across all industries, and they let us do things faster, safer, quicker, cheaper, more efficiently, and better, and are associated with building entirely new businesses. Some of those ASX companies on the growth line there didn't really exist a couple of years ago, and are now really big corporations. So a lesson from the 2008 financial crisis was that countries with weaker innovation systems suffered more from it, and that subsequent R&D budget reductions made them unable to build innovation systems they would need to become more resilient knowledge-based economy. Conversely, the knowledge-based economies with advanced R&D and innovation systems did pretty well through the global financial crisis and grew well out of it on the other end. And that comes from the United Nations recent article on the role of innovation. R&D and revenue also grew pretty quickly out of the global financial crisis. So we can see the revenue and R&D spending graphs there. When we hit about 2008-09, they take a dive. This is from the PwC Global Innovation 1000. But then R&D spending goes up pretty quickly, and as a percent of revenue post-2014 goes up quite a lot. So some of the big tech corporations in the US and Europe will spend 15 to 30% of their revenue on R&D. That's way more than Australian companies do. But ultimately, it was those companies that were most successful in building new products and responding to a new kind of marketplace. Also is a McKinsey study done following the global financial crisis, where they found nearly 60% of executives say R&D will be either the top priority or among the top 3 priorities this year. So that was back in 2010, following the financial crisis, where we started to see a change move, that the growth trajectory was about new products, new technologies, new efficiencies via R&D. So to conclude, hard work is important, but it won't be enough. To dig ourselves out of this massive hole, we've got to work smart. And that means we need science, research, technology, and innovation more than we've ever done before. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Stefan. Just quickly, there is a Q&A question and answer. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in there and we'll answer them at the end. And I'll hand over to Joe from CSIRO and Innovation Connections. Just on mute, Joe.
There's always one idiot. Good morning, everyone. My name's Joe Dodd. I'm an innovation facilitator at CSIRO. I'm going to have a bit of an overview about the Innovation Connections program today, and how CSIRO has various funding programs that can help small to medium-sized companies collaborate with the research sector. I'll start off just with a brief introduction to CSIRO in general. As hopefully everyone knows, CSIRO is Australia's national science agency. We've got over 5,500 people, mostly in Australia, but there are a few around the world as well. We have offices in Chile, US, Vietnam, Singapore to help Australian companies and Australian science make those global connections. Around $4.5 billion of value delivered to the Australian economy each year through CSIRO Science and Technology. And CSIRO is one of the world's largest multidisciplinary science and tech organisations. The key areas of research that CSIRO undertakes include, or mainly focused on 8 core areas. There's agriculture and food, data and digital, which is the area that Stefan comes from. Also energy, environment, health and biosecurity, which is obviously big in the news at the moment with a lot of the vaccine and antiviral work being undertaken by the ACDP site down in Geelong. Manufacturing, mineral resources and space. CSIRO is different from, I guess, universities in that it aims to be bridge that gap between research and industry and become the innovation catalyst for the country. So we're really focused on commercializing research, working with companies to help them develop their technology to become market ready. CSIRO has a number of spin-out companies, 170 startup companies have spun out from CSIRO, with over $1 billion in market cap of those companies at the moment. We work with every single university around Australia, as well as an awful lot of industry partners. So currently 2,500 research and industry partners that CSIRO works with on an annual basis. And we also deliver some programs delivering science and technology into schools as well. So helping the next generation, hopefully, of scientists to help develop Australia's future workforce. I guess my focus is going to be on the industry solutions. Companies can work with CSIRO in a number of ways. So by licensing technology, working with CSIRO to test or develop products. And we can also work with small to medium-sized enterprises in this way. And that's what our SME Connect team aims to do. So what we do is try and link Australian companies with the best research capabilities, both at CSIRO, but also at universities around the country and other research organisations. And we have 3 different funding programs to help co-fund projects between those small to medium-sized companies and the research orgs. The one I'm going to talk to you about is Innovation Connections. We also have CSIRO Kickstart, which Megan is going to go over, and a 3rd program called STEM Plus Business. CSIRO SME Connect is located throughout the country. As of 1st of July this year, we're going to become the national delivery partner for the Innovation Connections program. So recruiting people for Townsville and Gold Coast, starting in the next few weeks, but we're also in Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Canberra, Wollongong, Sydney, Newcastle and Brisbane as well. What Innovation Connections aims to do, it's a federal Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources program. And it aims to, sort of said about 3 times now, link companies with research orgs to carry out collaborative innovation projects, to help them develop an idea with commercial potential or overcome a technical problem. Companies can apply at any time. It's a quick turnaround and it's a fully facilitated program by someone like me. It's purely based on company eligibility. So if a company is considered as an SME by the Department of Industry rules, then you're guaranteed entry into the program and assistance through it. But why does Innovation Connections even exist? So maybe people don't quite realise how great Australia's research capability is. We've sort of already given you the CSIRO overview, one of the world's leading multidisciplinary science and tech organisations. Australia also has great research institutions throughout the universities and medical research institutes as well. So 5 Australian unis are in the top 50 of the QS rankings. There's various rankings of universities, but just going off the QS ones, 5 in the top 50, which is like more than pretty much any other country in the world other than the US. So more than China, more than Japan, more than Korea, more than Germany, more than France. Basically any advanced economy that you can name, Australia's research universities are, you know, higher ranked than most of those other countries. But the problem is Australia is not great at industry research collaboration or business R&D in general. You might have all seen the reports that come out that Australia is probably the worst in the OECD at business investment in R&D, the worst at industry research collaboration. But we've got these great research institutes there that companies can really, you know, tap into, sort of world-leading organisations. But we're just not doing it. So that's what Innovation Connections is there to try and help. The reason, or one of the reasons why, I suppose, is that SMEs make up the great proportion of Australian businesses. So around about 99.7% of Australian companies are designated SMEs, and they employ about 70% of the workforce in the country. But SMEs are limited by, I guess, their time, their expertise and funding, and find it difficult to engage with universities. So that's what we're here to try and do. So Innovation Connections, it's based on company eligibility. The companies need to be operating in one of the 5 key industry growth sectors designated by the government as an area of opportunity for the country. So areas where Australia has a technological or market-driven advantage. Those are advanced manufacturing, medical technologies and pharmaceuticals, oil, gas, energy and resources, mining, equipment, technology and services, and food and agribusiness, or be an enabling technology or service into one of those sectors. So for example, data science into one of those, or ICT into one of those sectors. Companies must have been operating in Australia for at least 3 years with a turnover or operating expenditure between $1.5 million and $100 million in either the current financial year or one of the previous 2. So long as you meet those requirements, then you're guaranteed entry into the Innovation Connections program, and then guaranteed the grant funding if we can put together a viable project. So the way the Innovation Connections program works is pretty simple. The first step is the facilitation application, which is basically the eligibility check. I would set that up for the company, put in a brief details of what you're looking to do, and then send it through to you to click submit, and approval normally takes about a week. The second step is the facilitation. So this is where I or one of my colleagues would work with you to understand what you're looking to do and discover, or really define what your research need is, help connect you to the best researchers and facilities across the research sector, across all the unis and CSIRO, help pull a project together, and then recommend the best way forward. Then we use those project details for the grant application. Again, that would normally be set up by one of the facilitators, sent through to the company to check and submit, and approval for that stage, again, normally takes about a week. Then we need to just provide a contract between the company and the university or CSIRO or the other research org. Most of the companies, most of the universities and research orgs utilize a standard template for that, so the contracting process is also very quick. And it has to be done within 30 days. So generally, we can go from initial application to offer of grant funding in about 4 to 6 weeks. So it's pretty quick, and it's a non-competitive scheme. There are 3 different types of grants. The researcher placement grants provide companies with up to $50,000 in match funding to pay for salaries and facility costs of work undertaken at a research organisation on their behalf. The second stream of grants is what's called a business researcher placement grant. This covers the salary costs of a research from the company to work on a collaborative project with a university. Again, it's up to $50,000 in match funding. Businesses can do 2 of these, so either 2 of the researcher placement ones or 2 of the business researcher placement ones, or 1 of each. So there's up to $100,000 in funding there. The third stream of grants is a graduate placement grant. So this is up to $30,000 in match funding for a company to employ a recent graduate on a research project. That's up to, so they have to be employed directly by the company for a minimum of 6 months. So up to $130,000 in match funding by the company. Completely non-competitive program. We just need a valid research project to be able to gain access to the grants. So the outcome of the program, so what's happened over the last 3 years, there's been $90 million of funding to research projects through the IC program. 40 million from grant funding, about 50 million from match funding from the company participants. 99% of businesses have been positive on the Innovation Connections program. 67% said they created new IP, 98% reported improved or new products and processes, and up to 88% of businesses were accessing new markets through the outcomes of the research that they went through. On the researcher side, 98% of researchers provided positive feedback on the project working with the company, and 86% of them developed an ongoing relationship with the business that they worked with afterwards. Through the graduate program, 87% of graduates were then offered employment by the business at the end of the project. So it's a really good program, great outcomes, and it's very simple to access. I guess those are the takeaway messages. If you'd be interested in exploring further, please just get in touch with me. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Megan, who is going to do a brief overview on the CSIRO Kickstart program.
Great, thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. My name's Megan. I currently manage CSIRO's Kickstart program. So Joe's given us a little bit of an overview of SME Connect. Just see if I can move my slides. Yep. And so within the broader SME Connect team or set of programs, we have the 3 funding opportunities, and Kickstart represents the sort of entry-level program for startups or on the small end of a small to medium enterprise. So eligible companies need to be either less than 3 years old or have turnover and expenditure costs under 1.5 million. And we work in a similar way to Innovation Connections in that eligible companies can receive up to 2 rounds of dollar match funding with a maximum of $50,000 per project dollar matched. The significant difference with Innovation Connections is that Kickstart is exclusive to CSIRO. So we can facilitate startups and small businesses to undertake R&D projects with CSIRO in areas where we have research capability. Kickstart is designed to help innovative Australian startups and small businesses access CSIRO's research capabilities and expertise. We can work on projects from 20,000 to over 100,000 in value, so a minimum 10,000 contribution from the company. Projects can go for a maximum of 12 months, and they're also fully facilitated. So if a company doesn't have a pre-established relationship with CSIRO, they can send through an expression of interest form, which will allow us to first confirm the eligibility of the company, and then at a high level, your description of the project will assist us to identify who within the organisation would be best placed to assist with your project. We're an apply anytime program, so we don't have specific rounds. Just when the company is ready, you can get in touch with us and we can assist you to submit your EOI and make those connections for you. Companies that are eligible to apply for a Kickstart voucher must be, as I mentioned, less than 3 years old or under 1.5 million turnover and expenditure costs. They need to have an ACN and be registered for GST. We are purely eligibility based, so as long as you meet those criteria, you're eligible for the program, and then it will just come down to the scope of the project and whether or not we have the capabilities that your business requires. The Kickstart vouchers can cover or co-fund the salary of the researchers, the operating expenses, so any travel if you're not co-located in the same state, for example, overheads, facilities costs, and then which are limited. We also can provide limited funding towards operating and consumables, for example, lab supplies and things like that. We've worked with, so Kickstart started up around January 2017, so we've been going for about 3 years now, and in that time we've done 121 projects. These are some of the companies that we have worked with or are currently working with, and that we've worked with around 100 companies now, so we're starting to get quite a few come back to do their second round of projects. And we work with almost every research business unit in CSIRO. So Joe mentioned in his presentation some of our key research areas. So these companies represent medical sciences, agriculture and food, data science, amongst others. I just wanted to give a couple of short case studies on some of the companies that have come through Kickstart. So we worked with a group called Lease Info, who develop lease management technologies. They partnered with Kickstart in 2017 and undertook a machine learning project with Data61, which then allowed them to launch their product Accurate in 2018. They then went on to participate in Innovation Connections as well, which is great, and have secured a number of significant customers for their product since undertaking these projects. In the agriculture and food space, we've also worked with a company called Australian Plant Proteins, who undertook some research with our Food Innovation Centre based down in Werribee, Victoria. And we helped them to develop a filtration method for their protein powder from faba beans. So their protein powder has a much higher protein content than other competitors. So it's sitting at around the 80% mark. They then went on to secure some additional funding, which allowed them to build a processing plant in regional Victoria, which is in process right now. They're looking at employing around 25 people based on some recent numbers from the company. And this has been a significant economic boost for the agricultural region in regional Victoria. So this has been a very successful Kickstart project, and this company had some ongoing collaboration with CSIRO, which is fantastic. And the ultimate goal of our program, which is to make those connections between CSIRO and industry, and hope to develop those relationships as the company grows and expands and continues to have further R&D requirements. So that's all from me on Kickstart. I've got here just a list of some of the key connections from CSIRO's SME Connect group for both Kickstart, Innovation Connections and STEM Plus Business. And then I think I'll be handing back to Joe, who's going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Nearly left myself on mute again there. Our next speaker is Mick Shattuck from OMX Solutions. So Mick and OMX have been through both the Business Researcher Placement Grant through Innovation Connections and the CSIRO Kickstart Grant. So Mick's just going to talk about OMX and what they've utilised those research programs for. So take it away, Mick.
Okay, so that should be a shared screen now. All good? Thanks, Joe. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to thank Justin, Joe and Megan for inviting me along to talk about the engagement we've had with CSIRO on these programs and their wonderful programs. I'm the Managing Director for OMX Solutions. We're a 3D titanium printing oromaxillofacial company. We've been in operation for around about 3 years, going into 4. And we've successfully delivered now in excess of 300 customised patient-specific devices for patients primarily in Australia and a few in India now. Just need to click here, and there we go. Our current scenario with the COVID situation is that the office is currently shut. Our office is currently shut. We are working from home like most people. As a result of that, we are also working on reduced hours and reduced pay. Primarily, this is to facilitate the sustainability of our reserves. As it stands at the moment, we're entering 4 months without any revenue stream at all, or any revenue stream to speak of. Despite what you may or may not have heard around elective surgery, certainly from maxillofacial activity, which is certainly our specialty, has not recommenced in full and is still quite restricted. So this will continue to impact our opportunity for revenues going forward. And we're attending the office, as I am this morning, to give this presentation for limited activities, primarily around attending to mail, but also because of the nature of our business, we still do have a couple of cases going on here and there. It's a loan kit nature, so we need to restock and resend and ship componentry, including hardware, implants, and instrumentation. Part of our R&D activity also means that we still also have some printing and prototyping, which we do in-house, so that's still being attended to here. Our expertise is in the digital space, and primarily we are the creators of what I would call smart technical files. We work with a large number of partners as supply partners. So around Australia, we work with Bres Medical, Objective 3D and Sabre for various different aspects of our activity ongoing and as part of our commercial in-market activity. Additionally, we also work with most of the certainly Victorian-based university groups, and we've had some discussions in New South Wales as well. But certainly we're well known and have worked on a number of specific research projects with the University of Melbourne, RMIT and Monash. As Joe mentioned, we have been participating with CSIRO on some projects, including Innovation Connections and the Kickstart programs, which I'll go into later. We've also been engaged with a number of other smaller groups and hospital groups, including the research department at St Vincent's Hospital here in Melbourne. Our owner-founder, George Dimitroulis, a well-known and regarded maxillofacial surgeon, has an appointment there. I think it's worth noting as well, as part of our approach, we are an ISO 13485 certified business. We have an audit coming up, which will be our second annual audit in July of this year. But additionally to that, we have pursued a basis of quality programs around our activities. So most of our devices are actually TGA certified, even though they play in the customised space. Types of products we take into market and that we have commercially in market at the moment are evidenced in this slide here. We have a suite of products called the Osseo Frame, which are basically bone attached devices for the receipt of an attachment, be that an eye, an ear, teeth, and even a nose prosthesis. Our other main product that's been in market for quite some time now is the T&J prosthesis for the replacement of the jaw. In excess of 180 devices now in market. I think it's approaching 200 in fact. So we've got quite a track record of commercial in-market devices. Around about 300 individual components now sold into market. So we consider ourselves, I think, quite expert in this area. There's 4 to 5 major products that we have ongoing in our R&D department, which are separate to this. I think it's also worth noting, given the audience, that we've since the last 2 years, I think we've had around about 25 university students, mostly undergraduates, working through our business. Currently, this year we've had 7, and of those 7, we have 2 capstone projects ongoing. I think by the end of the year, our plans are that we will have an additional 6 students come through for some work experience in our organisation. So we're quite keen to continue to foster that sort of activity. Another key part of our digital platform is the planning that we can provide a surgeon for the day, not just for the day of surgery, but as a mental plan for how he may approach it. So on the left here, we have a scan and a skull. On the right, what we've managed to provide the surgeon here would be not just the hardware as a solution for the anatomy that he's wanting to address, or she, but also the osteotomy cuts and so forth, which we plan and map. And so we're able to provide the surgeon enhanced and an advanced surgical digital approach to the surgery by offering splints, guides, biomodels, and also a pre-operative surgical plan, which further as part of our digital offering, we're able to offer a surgeon on the day of surgery. So whilst in the operating theatre, whilst they'll have a biomodel and other such things available for them for referencing, we're also able to provide a virtual and simulated environment for them on the screen, which certainly provides them with a greater capability of a far more accurate and precise means of surgery. If we go on to our next slide, this is a overview, very simple overview of what our digital surgical planning would look like. We have very often a number of moving parts when we're taking a scan in. And so essentially, if we follow this through, a surgeon would have a patient that requires a device from us because of the type of anatomy that they're presented with. We would receive those scans into our office in DICOM format. We would then mock up a planned solution for that surgeon. The surgeon then would receive that for any final inputs and certainly for approvals. Once that's approved, the solution that we're designing for that patient then can go off into a number of different directions, and again, all in a digital format. So what we're trying to get away from as much as possible, and in the dental maxillofacial space, they're actually quite advanced, I think, in this compared to many other clinical specialties, is that they are already mostly digital, although there are still quite a number of stone models and molds and plaster casts that we're getting in for some of the patients, which then require us to scan them. But once we've got our design signed off, those scans then go off to our suppliers, be that Brez or Objective 3D or some others, for manufacturing. We take receipt of those, we manage them from afar through our quality program, and they come back to us. We go through a quality program here in our facility before shipping and packaging with any of the other components that might be required. So for an osseo frame, for example, those other components may involve a denture and the teeth, which again, we would be engaged with a number of prosthetists or prosthodontists as part of that activity and a manufacturing plant. But ultimately what we're trying to achieve through this digital plan and format is to bring together on the day of surgery a total solution that fits perfectly and provides a superior outcome for both the surgeon and the patient on the day of surgery. One of the projects we've undertaken with CSIRO was a design and software format to enhance our speed and capability with as few clicks and as few manual adjustments as possible for the creation of a temporomandibular condyle. So what was happening was the scans would come in and our design teams would essentially have to start from scratch with regards to creating the condyle for any given patient. And so the plan with engaging with CSIRO was to come up with some proprietary software where we could design using a template of sorts, which enabled us to then move and expand, change angles, change the profile, etc., of the condyle in as fewer moves as possible and in as many different planes and directions. It was a fairly large mission, but I think we achieved it reasonably well. Our current project is a surgeon engagement tool for the placement of teeth. And by using some clever data and software with the CSIRO team, we're hoping to come up with an initial primary fixation point for the occlusion of the teeth, which will then give us a quicker and faster pathway to designing the definitive implant for the surgeons. It allows the surgeon some engagement with the design. It keeps it to a minimum so that therefore we can then go ahead more quickly, do our work and present them with ideally a finished and ready to go product for manufacture. The benefits of working with CSIRO on these programs, I could list more. Joe would like me to list more, I'm sure. But quintessentially, CSIRO are experts in their field. They have some underlying access to licenses and other software. I think they understand certainly our business. They've done some work in our area before, which has been very helpful. We'd agreed on the project and the deliverables that the project was intended to deliver, which are mutual, which was good. And the funding commitment for these programs, I think, is perfect for we've got a number of funding programs in place, which are quite large for major projects in research and development. Sometimes these sorts of grants, I think, are really useful for a pinch hit on a project where you just need, it'll sit there idle unless you just can find the money, and that money is really not a huge amount, but it's just enough that it can that can be kept getting kicked down the road. And so it's just a good size for a nice bite-sized project. And that worked well for us. Goals for our business. We've demonstrated in India with some small activity that our business as a digital platform is scalable, in that we don't need people in country or on the ground to support our business. We can manage that digitally from afar, which has worked very well. A lot of our business is involved around conferences and congresses. In fact, we had a cadaver workshop planned, which we've had to cancel as a result of COVID. I'm intending to reinvest, most likely, some of those saved revenues into more online education platforms, which plays into the digital space for our organisation. And again, there's some other activities there, including AI, which is, I guess, a bit of a dream of ours to be able to, from our library and files of patients, of which we've got quite a few, to start to accelerate that along. The challenges are more obvious, I think, mainly around in third world countries for our expansion. The lack of scanning devices and digital technology availability is a limiting factor for our scalability and access into those markets. The transfer of files and broadband widths, the perception that people still have that you need someone in the theatre or that you need someone to call upon a surgeon to develop a rapport and or to assist them through the process is still a strong thing. And IP protection, particularly around IT and software related activities, is an ongoing challenge. And the reason we're doing this is for our particular business, this is what I've determined as our addressable market. We are a niche player. Not everyone has a customised device for specific anatomies and requirements. We need to play in an offshore market. We need to play in the first world health economies with our types of devices, and this is why we're doing it. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Mick. That was a fascinating presentation about your business, and I'm sure a lot of people were very interested to hear, and I'm sure we'll have some follow-ups at the end. If you don't mind, if you just unshare your screen.
Yep.
Thanks, Mick. Great. So I hope everyone can hear me. APR.Intern stands for the Australian Postgraduate Research Internship program, and it's supported by the Federal Government Department of Education and Training. The APR.Intern program has a grant from the Department of Education and Training for promoting more women into STEM. And I'll tell you a little bit about the background of APR.Intern and also how the program works, along with the value and some of the partnerships that we have with different organisations to help support small to medium-sized enterprises in taking on PhD level interns. One of the great things about the APR.Intern program is it provides two solutions for business. One is a workforce solution in terms of staffing
with
working on types of programs that you have in the business. So a bit of background about the APR.Intern program. At the moment, I guess this is a bit old, but we are transitioning towards a knowledge-based economy from a real mining boom to now more of a knowledge-based economy around research, development, and as you heard from Joe, collaboration, and I think Joe mentioned this in his presentation earlier, is between PhD holders and industry is lower than other OECD countries. And we actually rank 11 out of 34 countries for PhDs, for people completing PhDs between 25 and 64 years old. So why are PhDs important to industry? Well, I guess PhDs create...
I think you're on mute, Justin, so we can't hear you. No, still can't hear you, Justin. Sorry. Should we
I'm happy just to
skip
maybe.
on to Mike and then
Yeah. So my
Justin
name's
in the.
Michael Whitcroft. I'm the Director of R&D at Telix, and we're very fortunate enough to work with APR.Intern and to place an intern in our company. We recruited Peter, who's been with us now for coming to the end of his 5-month internship, and I'd say it's been a really positive experience for a small and growing company like Telix to be able to tap into that talent pool that Australian does have in this research area. So we use the internship to create as a way of creating a new to kickstart a new research theme within the company. It's something that we've been wanting to do, and I think when you're an SME, you already have 1,001 tasks to do, and you never quite get around to those things. So we use the internship program to recruit new talent to focus particularly on this idea of researching a new topic area for the company, an idea of combinations of our products with others. And it was a new area for Telix. We had a broad understanding, but again, what Peter was able to do was to apply his research skills that he'd learned in his PhD to undertake a literature search in the area. So using his skills to collate the research, the current research and up-to-date research in the area, and also to interpret it particularly with a mindset from our company. You know, it's very good getting a literature review, but actually when you have one written for you, it really makes it much more relevant to your business. And the other part of Peter's role was also to help support the project management functions we have in setting up a clinical study that was connected to the same sort of research area. So to give a quick introduction to Telix, Telix Pharmaceuticals, we're based in Melbourne, but we're somewhat global now. We have offices in US and Europe and Japan, as well as people working remotely from lots of different locations within those countries as well. It's based on a technology of developing targeted radiation drugs for the diagnosis and therapy of cancer. The theranostic approach, you might have heard the buzzword. And it's very much in a global growth phase at the moment. So being a small company, we've grown substantially over the last 3 years less than 3 years since we listed on the ASX. And now we're over 50 FTE across those countries. So Telix, as I said, is a global company. We have people in those different locations. We're already working somewhat virtually. We outsource a lot of manufacture and research activity currently. So I guess the impact of the global pandemic didn't affect us directly in the way that we work. We're able to transition relatively easily to working from home. We're already pretty familiar with working on Teams and Zoom and all the different platforms that are available. So from a kind of personal standpoint, it wasn't so much of a change, but of course it did impact our research, our sort of clinical research. We are reliant on, and also manufacturing, we're reliant on an international supply chain. And radiation being a consumable, has a limited time span and a half-life. You have to get that drug to the patient in a meaningful time span. So we reacted we're also reliant on working with surgeons and medics to run the studies. And of course, understandably, their attention was focused elsewhere, and also elective surgery, as I think Mick might have said. It was definitely put off the cards. So we reacted quite quickly to the emerging situation of pandemic. We believe we paused the clinical studies. We made a decision just to put a pause on those studies, and we did actually refocus a lot of the company on those development activities. Investing in, we saw it as an opportunity to invest in R&D and invest in those projects so that we could actually, the theme was to actually be able to, when the situation allowed, that we would be shooting off out the blocks. We would have all the planning, all the development, all the thought process, all the meetings would have been done during COVID, and we could actually then initiate and activate those plans. So really what, you know, it was maybe fortuitous we had Peter as well in for that time. And as an intern, he was able to, it made his time all the more significant for us in terms of planning and developing the next phase of Telix's growth. So it was quite a fortuitous timing to have an intern at that time. Also interested to see that it kind of correlates with Stefan's slides that showing that companies are showing an increasing shift towards R&D, and that R&D and innovation really does pay off in the long term. Actually investing in that does pay off. So I guess coming to the end of Peter's internship, it's been a highly successful one for us and been a positive thing. We'll be happy to do it again. I'll recommend other SMEs do take up this opportunity. It is an opportunity for us. We're now in a phase where the clinical study is moving into a kind of much more clinical phase for clinical protocol study design and things. We've actually got a lot of the foundation and design, the research that supports that clinical study design. And also we're moving into an active phase with preclinical studies to really explore this area, and we're in a really good state there with the research that Peter's pulled together. I would also mention that I believe Peter has benefited from his experience. Academia gives you a lot of skills, but it gives you a certain dimension on matters. And he already had somewhat entrepreneurial ambitions and an interest in the biotech industry. And so I hope that his experience has been beneficial for him as well. So yeah, then that's really what I wanted to say, and recommended that others take up the opportunity. Back to you, Justin.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much,
studio.
Thank you very much, Mike, and apologies about the audio. Let's hope that it won't cut out on me again. But I guess that's a great. It looks like it's cut out again. Just bear with me.
Sorry, can everyone hear me? Great, okay. So I'll just share my screen and hopefully everyone can hear me through the presentation. So as I was saying before, and thanks Mike for obviously giving us a good background, the APR.Intern program helps to connect industry of all sectors and size, including small to medium enterprises, research institutions, big corporates, startups, and also not-for-profits, along with academia. So a PhD student through the APR.Intern program brings along their professor or associate professor as a mentor for them on the project. And then they will connect with industry through a short-term 3 to 5 month project. So essentially the process, the industry come to us with a need or a problem or an idea or a R&D project. And what our role is as a business developer at APR.Intern is to help find the business a candidate. So we do the candidate search, and we work with all of the universities across Australia. And so far, I think we've worked with 32 universities. And we've placed 350 interns across in the last 3 years. So we do a lot of the screening. So when we have a project, we screen each candidate that applies. We pair them up with a mentor if their academic professor isn't quite within the research area of that industry project. And then what happens is that's when the project can start. And that's where the internship starts. They're full-time internships for a short-term period over 3 to 5 months. So I just want to talk quickly about the cost of an APR internship. Essentially for 3 months, it's a $20,000 investment from the organisation. Through the National Research Internship Program rebate from the federal government, as I mentioned before, businesses with an ABN that are based in Australia are eligible for a 50% rebate. So what comes out of that initial $20,000 investment is that the APR.Intern program has a project management fee, which actually is reinvested back into the program as we're a not-for-profit. The university where the host university where the student's from receives 14,500 of that 20,000. The university disperses those funds of $3,000 per month to the student as paid as a scholarship, and the academic mentor receives $5,500 as a one-off payment to their research account, which they can use to help assist them maybe to drive to the industry partner's office, and I guess on research projects that are happening within the university, as well as obviously spending time mentoring the student each week on the project and helping maybe with some moral and technical questions to help direct the students' research within the project. Some of the benefits for PhD students are that they research for impact. So they get to put their thesis and the research that they've done at the university into a real world problem and really create impact that they might not get just from working at the university. They do fast track their career. So they build up a CV, obviously with a great organisation, a number of organisations that we've worked with. And this really benefits them down the track when they do finish their PhD and maybe thinking about going into industry. The soft skills they build working within industry obviously is another really great factor. They build up the communication, teamwork, and other skill sets that potentially they may not get or may not get as much a variety within while doing their PhDs. They build up professional experience, and as I mentioned, that communication. They also receive a scholarship as well, which is a top-up scholarship of $3,000 per month to any other scholarship they're receiving. So they have earning potential of between $9,000 and $15,000. The benefits for industry are that they do get rapid results in 3 to 5 months on a project. They retain all intellectual property. They fill a skills gap. There is minimal administration within the project, as well as the university looks after all administration. Well, we do a lot of the administration, APR.Intern, but the university looks after the payment of scholarships, students, the PhD students' insurance while they're out on site or at your office. And as I mentioned, I guess that takes away the burden of incorporating them into a HR system or something like that. And the industry also can access a 50% rebate at the end of the project. So from that $20,000 initial investment, they receive $10,000 back from APR.Intern and the federal government. So from the 350 internships that we've done in the past 3 years, 98% have indicated that they're satisfied with each project. So that's an unheard of rate in terms of satisfaction. Students and PhD students have indicated 97% satisfaction rating, which is also really great. And 96% of mentors or academics at universities are reusing the program. 67% of those academics are actually introduced to new industry partners, creating new partnerships for universities and also an industry. 58% of those academics and industry partners are continuing the collaboration further than the internship initially started. So that might be resulting in a PhD that goes for 3 years or further bigger collaboration. So as I mentioned before, we work with a number of different organisations. We work with government. Around 30% of the projects that we place are with government. 30% are with big corporates like the banks and I guess accounting firms. We also have 30% of our projects are in the SME sector as well. And the other 10% are research institutes and not-for-profit. So as I mentioned, that we have the partnership with the Australian government. For a 3-month project, the Australian government contribute 50% of that. Initially, the organisation contributes $20,000 upfront, and they receive 50% at the end of the project. So for a 3-month project, with the support of the federal government, it's a $10,000 investment. We also have partnerships with other organisations on top of the federal government. And one of those in Victoria is with the Defence Science Institute. The Defence Science Institute sponsor projects that are related to essentially defence projects that might have an impact within the defence industry, or maybe affect people who are returning from service, those types of projects. And they can be very varied in type. Essentially, the Defence Science Institute invests $10,000 into the upfront cost of the $20,000 project. So as a business, you're investing $10,000. At the end, you do receive still a 50% rebate on the money that you've put into the project. And the final cost for a 3-month project with the Defence Science Institute is a $5,000 investment. We also have the same partnership with Defence Science Centre over in Western Australia. So it's exactly the same thing. We also have a partnership with the Innovative Manufacturing CRC, and that's a national partnership. So for any manufacturing related projects with a manufacturing readiness level of 3 or 4, the IMCRC are really keen to partner with those organisations to help fund the project. So the IMCRC voucher is a 25% investment from them to help with the upfront cost of the initial 20,000. And on top of that, at the end, there's a 50% government rebate on the industry funds that are put into the project. So for the final cost for a 3-month project is $7,500. We also have the Defence Innovation Network, which is exactly the same as the Defence Science Centre and BSI, where they receive a rebate of a 50% and a 10K upfront voucher. We also have one other partnership with FIAL, which is a new partnership, and FIAL are willing to contribute up to $4,000 for an investment in an internship for companies within the food and agricultural sector. And for more information, you're welcome to contact me on my details here. And now what I might do is open it up to a Q&A session. And I noticed that we do have a number of questions there. So if everyone could potentially unmute, I'm just going to go into the Q&As. I think we had an initial question. Someone asked, what does an SME stand for? So a small to medium enterprise. And I noticed that Megan has answered that. So I think I might hand over now to Joe and Megan just to answer a couple of one of the questions was, where can we find more information on the graduate placement grants? Is there a link somewhere?
Yeah, hi Justin. Yeah, so I did put a link in the chat, but if anyone just wants to get in touch with me afterwards, I'm more than happy to send through any further info or just have a discussion about what you're looking to do and what might be whether things might work or not.
Great. We also had a question from Paul De Bruin from the AI group. He said, can you describe what sorts of things qualify as research in a business, i.e. product, services, but what about operational improvement initiatives?
Yeah, so I can just read out the answer I typed to Paul. So in general, with the Innovation Connections program, the research does need to be focused on helping a company develop an idea with commercial potential or to overcome a technical problem. So operational improvement initiatives, so not necessarily something that's best placed for universities or CSIRO to help deliver. The exceptions would be where sort of a research angle is beneficial. So for example, if it included exploring the use of Internet of Things in a business's manufacturing process and the best way to implement that, and a research project to sort of provide that answer was a good way to do it, then the Innovation Connections grant can cover that. Likewise, we can include research projects that are market or business focused. So if it was looking at future market strategy and developing strategy around where a business should be looking for in the future. So looking at market trends and what they would need to do to focus and access those, then we can include some activities like that under an Innovation Connections grant too.
So we had another question from Yogendra Kumar Kana. Is the stipend amount non-taxable? And I assume that Yogendra is referring to the APR.Intern program and the scholarship the student, the PhD candidate receives. They are non-taxable. However, if the student is part-time, there is a potential that the scholarship, which will be prorated, if the internship is part-time or the student is actually part-time in their candidature, then there is potential for it to be taxed. However, if it's a full-time internship and a full-time PhD student studying, then that's not taxable. Okay, we have an anonymous question. What options are there for international students in APR.Intern? I've heard that the government may now provide a rebate for international PhDs. Is there a workaround for that? Essentially, there is a cap on how many international students can be placed through the program with the government rebate from the Department of Education and Training, and that cap has been reached as that grant now runs out at the end of the year. So what that means is that organisations looking to engage with an international PhD candidate do have to pay the full costs of the project. And so there is a little bit more extra, I guess, for an international student to be engaged. So there is a bit of a, unfortunately, a downside around international students, but that's not to say that we do have a lot of organisations, or some organisations that are maybe a little bit bigger, looking to engage with all types of candidates, whether they're international or domestic. So we had a question from Van Nagoyan. Are there any innovation supporting programs for service SMEs? So from an APR.Intern perspective, any R&D type projects, whether that scope can be quite broad, something that we'd be happy to chat about offline, and I'm sure I'll let Joe answer as well from Innovation Connections, also Megan.
Yeah, so as I probably briefly skated over, there are 5 key industry growth sectors that the government has identified for the Innovation Connections program. But if you are providing an enabling technology or service into one or more of those sectors, then you can be eligible for the Innovation Connections program. I guess my main message would be don't rule yourself out until we've had a chat to see whether we can fit you in. The government are quite flexible and do tend to try and help people get into the program rather than bar things. So hopefully we can be able to assist.
And similarly from a Kickstart perspective, we don't, the growth sector is not part of our criteria, but we still look for projects where there's that novel technical challenge that needs to be overcome. But in terms of the industry and what that's applicable to, we are industry agnostic. So it's more about the technical side of the project and what you need our assistance with, as opposed to the industry or the sector that it's been that will be that the company is applying from.
And I think there's one more question from someone who's anonymous. For the Kickstart program, is the patentability of the research verified prior to conducting any research?
So we don't undertake a patent search as part of the application process. The company would need to provide us an indication of their business and their business plan and where they're at. And they're also at varying stages of their development. We work with startups that can be, a week old through to 10 years, but are still quite small and under that 1.5 million in turnover. So it's not a formal part of the process because it's not necessarily an outcome for all of the projects that we're working on. But yeah, we will also go by the advice of our researchers. So they will be able to indicate to us whether or not it's a project that fits in with the type of work that we would do at CSIRO.
Thanks, Megan. So we have another question, or maybe more of a comment, but it seems that the existing innovation support programs focus only on technological innovations. Any support for non-technological innovation? It's found that non-technological innovation generated a greater impact on productivity for Australian SMEs. I'll quickly just answer that, and I'm happy to hand over to Joseph and Megan too if they would like to add anything. But we have a number of projects that aren't just technical, but we have a number of projects that are more qualitative. And some of those projects are based around, I'll give you an example. We're doing a project at the moment with the University of Melbourne and the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. And we have a PhD candidate from, they're doing some research around a research project they have that's examining, I guess, the relationship between children and families. So it's not all technical. There are some non-technological innovation projects that are happening within organisations, and they've engaged with us and are having quite a bit of success.
Yeah, I can add a bit to that, I suppose. So Innovation Connections is mainly focused on those areas that I mentioned, but there is a sister program to Innovation Connections through the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, which is the Business Evaluation or Business Growth Program, which is part of the Entrepreneurs Program. So that provides companies with an experienced business advisor to talk through their strengths and opportunities and come up with a plan on focusing on how they can access those. And there are matched grant funding, so dollar for dollar funding of up to $20,000 to then implement some of the recommendations from that collaborative work. So if anyone would like some information on that, I can certainly pass that on or make some introductions to one of the business advisors for that program.
Joe, I might just add, there's another question from Ali around how can we hear about more seminars and information about CSIRO for SMEs?
There are lists of events on the CSIRO website, so I think you can sign up to be notified of those, I guess. But yeah, we need to do a better job at informing people of what we're doing, I suppose. So yeah, I mostly went through APR.Intern and the Oz Industry website for promoting this one. So yes, I guess I can send through a link in a bit.
Brilliant, thanks, Joe. So I guess I don't see any other questions. So before we wrap up, I wanted to say a very big thank you to our panelists today. Joseph and Megan, thank you very much for presenting about CSIRO's Innovation Connections and Kickstart programs. Mick from OMX Solutions, thank you very much for presenting about your organisation and some of the interesting R&D projects that are happening and all of the work that you're doing with students as well, which is something that we really support. Michael, thank you so much for being part of the presentation and talking about David's project. I noticed that David's online and has commented a couple of things, so we do really appreciate you engaging with us and explaining a little bit about the process. And lastly, but not certainly not, I guess, to Stefan, thank you so much. It was such an interesting presentation. I found such a, I guess it's a real eye-opener about what's happening in the world at the moment, but also, I guess, how the world can rebound from such a crisis as we've been through today. So lastly, I wanted to say I hope you're all safe and well, and have a lovely day, and we look forward to connecting with you in future. Please feel free to reach out to any of us
afterwards.